Welcome to the Senior Thesis Conference 2021 at the Minda de Gunsberg Center for European Studies. We are so happy to see you all on the screen after a particularly challenging year for many of us on campus and around the world. Thank you to Michael Berrio and Laura Falloon for their incredible help throughout the year at the Center for European Studies, and of course our chairs, Sally and Michael, who have been spearheading this remote version of the Junior Thesis Workshop this year. And we are looking forward to hearing more about your projects. Greetings from campus, best to everyone, and be well and safe. Sally, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Vasilis, for your and Laura's and Michael's support for this project for many, many years. On behalf of myself and Michael Tworek, I am very happy to welcome you to the Writers' Conference that is the capstone of our year here at the CES workshop. We are immensely proud of every class of senior thesis writers, but this class is really something special. In January and February of last year, they had an idea of what their projects might be. They had research questions, they had proposed methodologies, they had archives, they had communities to interview. They won grants from CES, and then they were ready to spend their summers in Europe to pursue these. And as we all know, life happened. Those who were in the US couldn't go. Those who were already living in the places they wanted to study were hemmed in by restrictions. They, along with the rest of us, were navigating the difficulty of living in a global pandemic situation as they conducted their research and their writing. They had to change their projects in order to be able to achieve their goals. Their already remarkable achievement is even more so. Today is their opportunity to show us all how they did it. So here's how this will work. For those of you coming in now, each of the students here will speak informally for 5 minutes about their experience. Then after all have spoken, we will have an open Q&A period so current juniors can ask these members of the class of 2021 to elaborate on their experience developing their senior thesis project. Thank you and congratulations to our class of 2021 members. And I will go ahead and introduce our first speaker. Oh, 1 second, as I set up my timer. So our very first speaker is Hannah Craig. The title of Hannah's project is Children of the Ceasefire, an analysis of the post-Good Friday generation in Northern Ireland. She comes to us from history and literature. Hannah, you have 5 minutes, take it away.
Thank you very much, Sally. Hello, everybody. So according to my title, I focus on Northern Ireland, where I'm originally from. And my thesis argued about the architecture there between Catholics and Protestants. And for the final thesis, I focused on peace walls, which are physical barriers. There are 100 of them in the capital city of Belfast. So I went and I wanted to interview a lot of people who live near these walls and who have had them there for over 20 years, if not more. So my thesis overall involved a lot of interviewing, reading, and research. And I will just tell you a little bit about that process overall. So I started the research in July, going through the summer, and was in the United States. And I originally planned to go back to Northern Ireland to do some research. So in order to adapt, I had to kind of ship some books over from Northern Ireland. I had to sort of work with the time zone and do some interviewing. And it was definitely tough not being able to access certain sources, but I found really chatting to people and doing that method was a great way, and also just a great source of information that I couldn't get from the Harvard Library at the time or archives. So for me, it was great to just be very open, flexible at that stage of the early research. And then as I caught up and I sort of started to develop some themes and what I wanted to focus on, it was really important for me in the process to make really great notes that I could refer back to. So I sort of had on my Cetero interview write-ups, long pages of notes for things. But one key thing that I think helped me in the long run was actually just one-word tags that you can add on, because obviously being remote, there's just so much info you're dealing with overall. So I was able to revert back to certain things just by having some keywords logged in to the Cetero. So that virtual way of doing it was a great thing in the long run that I would really encourage a lot of people to use. And then moving in, I actually ended up going back to Northern Ireland, which was great, but unfortunately everything was locked down. So I couldn't use archives, couldn't use anything anyway. So I may as well have been in the US. But I used that time to keep going with the interviews, getting as much writing done as I could. And for the first chapter that I had to submit in November, a lot of it was just historical background and sort of the who, what, when, where, why of what I was dealing with. And that approach was great, because even though I didn't use that first chapter as a whole, I could take certain parts of it and mold it to certain themes that I developed later on. So having a good idea of everything, the historical background and a certain text helped me in the long run there as well. Another thing, as the process went on, I think with remote learning, as we all know, it can get very tiring being on a screen the whole time, and just wanting, especially during the fall, just being like, okay, I need to get away from a screen. I need a week or two off. So that was definitely tough. But one thing that helped me was just not taking that break until Christmas. So I was in the swing of things. I knew once my exams were over that had I just taken that week off, it would be very difficult for me to get back to being focusing on the thesis. So I really tried to stick it out. And I encourage you, if you're not too burned out, to keep in the swing of the writing and the research that you would be used to. And then you can really enjoy the break, because I found those 10 days or so that I had to just focus on the thesis were by far the most productive out of the whole process. So I know the remote research and writing can be very tough, but 3 tips that I would give to all of you would just be super open and flexible in the early stages. Quarantine, as tough as it is, can be great to just knuckle down, get some reading in, get notes taken, so that when things do open up, maybe in the future or as the process goes on, it can be a lot easier. And also just keep going, stick with it, especially as winter break hits. Try to really try and get the process when you're already into the habit of work. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Hannah. That was fantastic. Now let's go to Eliza Omler, whose project is entitled A Study of Scottish Nationalism Under Brexit. And she comes to us from sociology and also from global health and health policy. Go for it, Eliza.
Hi, so I am Eliza. I'm a sociology student. I have been studying Scottish nationalism and identity, since basically March of last year. I actually think my title topic, Scottish nationalism and identity under Brexit, was the same in the grant application as it was on my actual thesis that I turned in, which I don't think is common, especially in COVID, but I had a really, really enjoyable time writing this. I applied thinking I would be traveling to Scotland in the summer and interviewing wide swaths of the population and doing some archival work. Obviously, that did not end up happening, but I ended up being able to leverage some contacts that I already had. I know some people who go to the University of St. Andrews, and so I talked to them and basically was kind of like, can you help me reach out to your Scottish friends so that I can still do this research? And that ended up kind of being a seamless way to continue my work. So I did just qualitative, methods, interviews. I spoke to people between June and September of 2020, talking to them about their ideas of what Scotland is like and what Scottish nationalism is like and how their identities are changing during Brexit, also with the recent independence referendum that happened in 2014, and with COVID. I just kind of wanted to get a measure of how identities were changing because of that. And changing it to Zoom, changing it to online meant that my population that I was speaking to was greatly reduced. So my ultimate findings could not be as generalizable as I thought they would be, but it did mean that my analysis, I think, was way more accurate for the population that I did speak to, which was really great. And I think transferring the process from being in person to online in some ways was actually more helpful than I realized, because I had also been planning to intern over the summer. I had an internship in the spring that I was just going to kind of continue. And I thought I could use the last month or so of summer to get all my in-person interviewing and research in. And now, having done it, I see that research is definitely more all-encompassing than you realize. And so being able to do online work sort of alongside my internship this summer worked really well. And I actually think Zoom interviews and online research in general could be something that could continue long after the pandemic, because I think my interviews were really good. And I think people were maybe a little bit more open online than they would be in person, because I've done in-person interviews pre-pandemic and people were a little more closed off. But I think online interviews are a great replacement for in-person interviews. And if you're someone who has kind of competing priorities for what you want to do this summer, it's definitely like a totally viable path. My research itself, as I said, like didn't change much. My ideas of what I wanted to do and what I wanted to study were pretty much the same from my application process to when I actually sat down and wrote my thesis. Some general advice I'll give just to anyone thinking about writing theses are like, do it if you really want to do it, because writing this thesis was genuinely so much fun for me. Like, I could work on my thesis from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. in one day and still feel like I could work another 5 to 10 hours after that. And I think part of that is like self-selecting. Obviously, I like doing research, I like writing, and I really liked the topic that I chose. But I have some friends who are also writing theses who like were doing it because their parents wanted them to, or because they thought they needed to for honors, or it just seemed like the right thing to do, or they chose a topic that they weren't genuinely interested in, and they didn't enjoy the thesis process as much as I did. And I recognize that like my mindset to it is probably pretty unique, of being like having so much fun with it. But I do think writing a thesis can be a really just fun experience, as well as enjoyable and stressful at times too. But like, ultimate advice would be to write a thesis if you want to write a thesis. And if you don't want to write a thesis, don't write a thesis, I guess. Yeah, I'm happy to take any questions later, but we can go on to the next speaker now. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Eliza. So next we will hear from Francesco Rolando. Francesco's work is entitled Healthcare as a Border: Migrants' Access to and Exclusion from Healthcare Services in Turin, Italy. He comes to us from social studies and also from molecular and cellular biology. Thank you, Francesco.
Thank you so much, Sally, and thank you so much, CES. It's wonderful to be here, and let me start by actually congratulating all my fellow last semester seniors for turning in their project. We did it. So as you were mentioned, the title of my project actually changed slightly in my thesis. My thesis is now called Temporaneous Existences, Migrants' Access to and Exclusion from Healthcare Services in Turin, Italy. And in the next 5 minutes, I will take you all on a bit of a journey, if you will allow me to explain how I came to this project, and I hope not to bore you too much. But since my first year at Harvard, my academic interest focused on the intersection between healthcare and migration. So I had a question in mind, such as how is healthcare dispensed to people on the move or to non-citizens within a country, and how does medical technology travel across borders? In the summer, between my sophomore and my junior year, for the first time, I entered Turin, which is the capital city of the Piedmont region in northern Italy, not just as the capital city of the region where I was born, but also as a field to do research on topics of migrants' inclusion and exclusion. During that semester, I started laying the foundation for the project that would then become my senior honor thesis. I met people working there to guarantee that foreigners' constitutional right to health is respected, no matter the legal definition that is applied by Italy's dysfunctional migration system. I knew I wanted to conduct an ethnographic project by then, so I really wanted to start creating connections and important interaction with people that could be useful for that. I knew that undergraduate is a very limited time to conduct anthropological or ethnographic research, so I wanted to make sure to capitalize on places that I was somehow familiar with. And of course, knowing the language I'm from there was incredibly useful, as I hope it's extensively clear. As the COVID-19 pandemic loomed, my ideas had to change and morph. In March of 2020, when we were sent home, I knew that I would be in Italy for the summer, but I didn't know what the situation would be like for my research. So I just stayed in contact with my participants, stayed in contact with my thesis advisor, and drafted and ended up crafting a project that I could be proud of. And I do believe that we were able to center some voices that would have otherwise been lost during the chaos caused by a global emergency. So I conducted the bulk of my research during the summer for the 3 months between May and August 2020, thanks to the support of the Center for European Studies and the Weather Center for International Affairs. I collected primary resources then, started doing readings, and tried to understand how care is dispensed and how foreigners interact with the complex network of public and private charitable actors that dispense care to this population. And in my thesis, I ended up arguing that healthcare services participate in the creation of the unstable temporalities that characterize the experience of foreigners, particularly those who are considered regularly present in the country. A more familiar word for my American speaker might be undocumented, but of course the word has a very charged political meaning too. So I use the closer Italian word, which is irregular. During the past year, I spent it consolidating my data, summarizing it, writing, integrating literature into it, and I had a wonderful experience. I'm so happy and honored to have had a chance to work on this project with some people that I truly admired. And I was incredibly, again, excited about having the chance to do this. But I do want to recognize that post factum, it is much easier to focus on what went well and push aside the difficult moments, because that's what we are trying to do in this place at times. So I just want to take also some time to recognize that during the writing process, there were moments where in the research project actually, there were moments where I would hit a wall, or where I would just write and write and write and then go back to it and read it, and everything would just feel meaningless or unimportant. And I want to tell you that, in the end, my project was about 30,000 words. That's the social studies word limit. And I have about 20,000 words that did not make the final cut because theory didn't really make sense in that sentence. The paragraph were not as smooth as I wanted them to. And during the process, I did feel a bit burden of having all those words that were going nowhere. But that's part of it. And I learned so much from writing things that actually didn't make it into the final project. I learned so much from hitting walls or being brought down by the pandemic and what was going on around me. While I had the privilege of being healthy and of having a family that was actually being healthy, it was definitely a complex and challenging process. And I think that it's important to recognize that it might be like that, no matter how much you like it and no matter how interested I am in the project. That being said, liking it and being interested in your project is, I think, necessary to get through it, mainly during such challenging time that I'm sure you all are going to have. But also exciting time, at least I hope. Again, I had more of those, so I can be very exciting. So I truly do believe that if you choose to write a thesis, and if you choose a topic that you find rewarding, meaningful, if you can truly believe in your project in some way, you will do great, and it's going to be a wonderful experience. And it's a great privilege to have a chance to write a thesis this way with the support of centers like the Center for European Studies or your thesis advisor. So I highly recommend to look for that team and enjoy the process. And I thank you so much for listening to me. And of course, I'm very happy to take questions later. And thank you, Sally, once again.
Thank you so much, Francesco. That was fantastic. Now we are very happy to welcome Nate Steele. Nate's thesis is entitled Aesthetics and Politics, an exploration of Adorno's writing on music. Take it away, Nate.
Thank you. Thank you to CES for this opportunity. Yeah, so my working title is Aesthetics and Politics, an exploration of Adorno's writings on music. I'm in a unique position because I've been on leave for the past year, so I have not actually finished my thesis like many of my fellow grantees have. So I can't tell you that much about finishing a thesis, but I can talk a bit about my thesis process during this long period of time. So yeah, I can hope to be able to share something useful from all that. My academic interests have always sort of spanned history, music, philosophy, and when I originally applied to the CES grant, I was planning a thesis that explored the manifestation of nationalism in music education programs in Germany. And the theoretical background of that thesis would have involved would have relied a lot on the work of the German theorist Theodor Adorno, who wrote a lot on music and politics broadly. That initial plan involved some interviews, a decent bit of traveling like everyone else. I was hoping to travel to a bunch of different cities, but obviously all of that had to be scrapped, and my solution was that I shifted the focus of my thesis and my research. So I shifted from more empirical work that required traveling and interviews I shifted to more theoretical work. So I ended up focusing to sort of scrapping the music education aspect and instead focusing on the theoretical aspect. I wanted to explore Adorno's writings on music in depth and focus on the intersection of art and politics. And I figured I could do that without traveling and just by hunkering down with a bunch of books and working with a good team of advisors. So at the beginning of last summer, I prepared a plan of study, some reading lists, all with the assistance of my advisor. It was just my process throughout the summer involved a lot of reading, a lot of meetings with my advisor, some self-imposed written assignments to help me engage with the materials, stuff like that. I knew relatively early in the summer that I would be taking a leave for the next academic year. So knowing that I would not be finishing my thesis on the same time frame as everyone else, and that I would likely be taking time off from thinking about my thesis, something that was super important to me was taking really, really detailed notes that I could come back to if I didn't think about my thesis for several months. So I kept taking notes very carefully throughout the entire summer, and then I ended my work on my thesis last summer. I guess ended sort of early September by sort of writing with my advisor a thesis bookmark, sort of a written summary of my work over the summer, and plan for my thesis next year. So again, I could have something to come back to. Since September, I've been working a full-time job, so I really did take several months off thesis work. I did some casual reading on related topics, but nothing serious at all. I've been working as a grant writer for an orchestra, so I've been tangentially related to my thesis, and that I've still been writing about music, sort of. But really, the thesis was had gone from my mind for several months, and then about a month ago, I started to return to my thesis, which was made. It took a little adjustment. I had to review some materials, but thankfully, due to all the notes I took, I was able to return pretty much where I left off. Got back in touch with my advisor, created a new reading list, a new plan of study, and one for the coming months that acknowledges the fact that I will be working a full-time job until coming back to school in the fall. So, for anyone who's thinking about thesis research at the same time as an internship or a job or some other something else that's going to take up a big chunk of your time, don't underestimate the amount of time all your thesis research will take you, and just be careful that you're budgeting your time accordingly. On the other hand, I don't know, I guess if I had to give one big piece of advice for people pursuing a thesis, it would be that, it's great to define a specific topic as best as you can, as early as you can, but really you got to give yourself room to explore. Recognize that in your research process, you're going to come across a wealth of related topics, a lot of other interesting tangents, and it's okay to explore them, and they may, really shift what you're writing your thesis about. I guess I would say don't feel, although although it is important to figure out something specific to focus on in order to, plan, I would account for, give yourself a decent chunk of time, some leeway to explore other research, other related topics, and your thesis will be all the better for it, and you'll be happier in whatever you decide to do. Yeah, I think that about sums it up. Again, as everyone says, I'll be happy to take questions. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nate. Our next speaker, Taylor Witzal, comes to us from the Departments of Government and also European History, Politics, and Societies. He has written a thesis entitled Explaining Stagnation in Domestic War Crimes Prosecutions in Bosnia-Herzegovina, Croatia, and Serbia. Thank you, Taylor. Take it away.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me today, and I'm excited to talk a little bit about my thesis. So like Nate, I actually also took time off, so I have not yet completed the thesis writing process, but maybe this is having these multiple perspectives can be helpful because I'm kind of in the thick of it. But as was said, so my thesis has actually changed a lot. I'm shocked, Eliza, that yours was able to stay the same from the start of your grant writing to the finish. That's pretty impressive. Mine has changed, and part of that was due to the pandemic. So initially, I was really interested in the prospect of looking at national prosecutions of war crimes in the former Yugoslavia, focusing mainly on Croatia, Serbia, and Bosnia. However, kind of as the COVID-19 pandemic hit, I realized I needed to make some adjustments, and the inability to travel really kind of let me think, okay, and honestly, looking back was a good decision because focusing in on one country, I think has allowed me to do a lot more. So it's really a really weird feeling to think, I could be on a totally parallel track, but because of the pandemic, I've changed things, but have just tried to kind of roll with it and make the most of it. So I kind of started just wanting to make sure, I knew that I wanted to do interviews, have been a big part of my process. And like I think a few people said, Eliza was talking about, in some ways interviews I think have actually been made easier. It's a lot less aggressive to record a meeting over Zoom than it is in person. I think people kind of almost feel a little bit more okay with talking in that way. And it's a lot easier to connect with people. So that's been kind of one good thing for me. And I took some notes while everyone else was talking because I wanted to echo a few things, but I wanted to echo what Nate and Eliza said about it's more time consuming than you might initially conceive of. I also kind of, during this gap year, have taken the chance to do other opportunities, and sometimes it put the thesis on the back burner. And first of all, realize that like, that's totally okay. Your thesis doesn't need to be number one at all times. Like you don't have to, that doesn't have to be the case. You can do other things. However, don't, after a 9-to-5 day at the internship, you may not feel as, so if you're trying to do a lot over one summer, just make sure that your timeline reflects that. I also want to echo what Francesco said about low points. There have been a million times throughout the thesis process where I've written something, and I think one thing we talk about a lot at Harvard is the imposter syndrome. And I think that totally applies to writing a thesis. You're like, who am I to kind of make this argument or to think that I can contribute in this way? And I think learning how to work through that is really important, and learning that that's a normal experience. And a few things that I think are really important, or that perhaps maybe haven't been mentioned. One is that the importance of a thesis advisor. I think that having an engaged thesis advisor was super critical for me because I was kind of like, I don't know what to do. And having those ability to have those frequent meetings have just been a total life savior. I've also wanted to say that, one thing that I did take the opportunity to do in the gap year was to explore the world of political science conferences. So next week I'm presenting at the Midwest Political Science Association conference some of my preliminary findings, and that can be a really cool opportunity that I had absolutely no idea about before I started doing the thesis writing process. You can just submit to a conference and they can kind of give you feedback and help you along the way. A normal thesis writing timeline, I don't know that you would have really the chance to do that, but it could still be a good opportunity to demonstrate your works. So definitely check some of those out if you're interested. And one thing I really did want to highlight is that you can really use your thesis research as a chance to explore what you might think could be next for you. So one thing that I didn't really realize was a lot of the people that I have interviewed for my thesis, I had really great conversations with them beyond the interview, and they've kind of helped set up connections for me in the Western Balkans, which is definitely where my region of interest is. And so I just kind of wanted to say that you can use it as a chance to meet more people, to connect with people, to see if this is something that you would want to pursue later on in grad school or a potential career in. And so for me, that's been one of the most valuable parts of the experience, I would say. And two little things, I'm going to finish up on this, but two little kind of research-oriented things that I probably should have known before I started was, number one, totally worth it to spend a ton of time just looking into the literature on your topic before you kind of go forth. I think that's one thing I wish I had done a little bit better, was really making sure I was aware of the existing literature there so that I don't necessarily have to come in later and pull things in when I've kind of already started. You don't want to find out that someone else has done the exact same project that you've done, but it's obviously okay if people have done similar things. And the second thing, another kind of very concrete tip, is figure out a system for organizing and cataloging your research. For me, I definitely am someone who has to stay organized or else I'll just forget everything. So whether it's a spreadsheet or whether it's Zotero or a different kind of software, you will be mad at yourself if you go through and read all this research and then in a few months you didn't really keep track of it and you don't know kind of what's there for you to reference. So those would be a few concrete tips, but very exciting time for all of you and super happy also to answer any questions.
Thank you, Taylor. There are some great suggestions, by the way, on the library website for various ways you can organize your research that we've been pointing folks toward. If you have any questions about suggestions, feel free to, either ask these folks or you can email me and Michael. We are happy to point you toward resources for that as well. So last but not least, we have Emily Markowitz. Emily comes to us from the Departments of Economics and Social Studies. Her thesis is entitled "Hate the Players or Hate the Game: Process Innovation in Western Europe." Thank you very much for being here, Emily.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Sally, for bringing us all here. So my thesis is looking at political parties and political competition in Western Europe. I was inspired by a couple of political parties, namely the Five Star Movement in Italy, which was based on this online platform where people can upvote, downvote legislation. Basically, it practices e-democracy, as well as, for instance, Podemos in Spain, which is based on these collaborative deliberative circles where different legislation kind of is founded and then gets channeled up. And so basically my main research question was what might incentivize certain new political parties to campaign on doing politics in a different way. And a lot of these parties don't really have as clear-cut of an ideology, but more distinguish themselves through their methodology or doing politics in a different way. And so as I was forming my thesis, it really was a product of knowing that the pandemic was happening and kind of being aware that I wouldn't be able to travel over the summer. Ideally, I had thought that I was going to go to Europe, different countries in Europe, and be able to interview supporters of these different political parties. But as I soon became aware that I wasn't able to travel, I started to kind of shift my methodology for my thesis, and it became a mixed method approach. So I did a lot of regression analysis based on different political parties, as well as creating my own measurements. And I did a couple case studies of certain countries. And so one of my main takeaways from this, and like one of the main suggestions I have, is that there's a lot of data available for Western Europe that like will allow you to, if you want, have more of a quantitative thesis, given the constraints of COVID. So there's data sets on a bunch of European political parties, for instance, as well as different surveys like the Eurobarometer. So like the ones I used was like Chapel Hill Expert Survey, and there's a whole list of them that you could look up. So this is like a good alternative to do if you can't physically travel and if interviews are not as possible. And so I was able to have more of a regression approach through the thesis. And then some other suggestions I have is that as people had mentioned, the thesis is a long process. And so what I found really helpful for me was people to spread it out over time. And so I worked on it over the summer, as well as, times where you don't have school, like winter break, were really good times for me for work. And then also just being flexible with your idea. My thesis changed a lot. The time at first, I was just looking at populist parties and then expanded more towards political parties in general. So I found that really helpful. And then a final suggestion is that thesis support groups are really helpful. So for instance, social studies offered that you could sign up for a group led by one of the social studies lecturers. And there's basically a lot of other students in it where you look over each other's thesis as it's evolving and give different suggestions, help line at it. And I found that really, really helpful just to have some of my friends look at my thesis throughout the process and kind of give advice from grammatical to structuring. So I found that really helpful too. And then a last thing is that the thesis, it provides you kind of with like an ability or like a reason to reach out to different scholars whose work you're interested in or who might be, at different universities or other institutions. And so I was able to do that and reach out to people that I was really interested in their research, saying that I want to talk to them because I was writing a thesis on a similar topic. And it led to a lot of fruitful conversations. So I'm happy to answer any questions too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. So I guess now we'll move into the question and answer phase. If you have, those of us who are here as attendees, you have any questions for one or for several or for all of our speakers today, feel free to raise your hand or otherwise indicate to us that you would like a turn to speak. And we will go ahead with that.
I have a question for everyone, actually. Forgive me for being a few minutes late. So my question to all of you is, what is the most unexpected thing that you learned about yourself as a student, as a scholar in this process? And how has it changed the way you think about your project moving forward? Elizabeth.
Yeah, I can begin with that. I don't know if unexpected is the right word, but I definitely learned a lot about myself in this process. One of the things being, and I mentioned this a little bit, but like I really, really love writing and editing. So I like genuinely would spend 10 hours at this desk doing nothing but that. And I had so much fun with it. And it's taught me a lot about myself in that way, but also like, I know now I want to like take that with me to my post-grad activities and what I do in life. Like clearly this is something that motivates me and that makes me happy. And so if I hadn't done this, I wouldn't have known that. So that's been really special.
Very cool. Very cool. Francesca.
I love the fact that we can still raise hands as panel. But I think that something that I want to add is one of the things that I learned is that I can be a scholar. I know that I've got to explain that, but I think that, I came into Harvard without really knowing what I was getting myself into. I'm an international student. I'm from a background that I know nobody that has gotten here before. And I was just very fortunate to be able to take this path in life. And I didn't really know exactly what I could contribute. As Taylor mentioned, it felt weird to believe that I could contribute to literature and write something that was interesting and that people would read and learn and understand. And writing this thesis, receiving feedback from people such as Emily, because I was in her workshop, from students and from advisors in social studies, it's been so incredible and so validating, even for someone like me that didn't feel as if that was gonna be my path or my option. So if you need any more reasons to believe that you belong here and that you deserve everything, that you're on the right path, or that you can do this path and do something great, I think writing a thesis is a great way to tell that to yourself and to show yourself how strong you can be in this academic path. And I'm so happy for all the support I received throughout it. And that's been so wonderful and amazing. So I highly recommend thinking about it also in this way. After all, we are all in our undergraduate experience, so take advantage of it.
That's a great way of putting it. I think Elizabeth and you both have emphasized that emphasis of taking advantage of this opportunity. Any other insights from any of the other panelists that you've learned? Taylor, please.
I think in response to that question and kind of touching on something I mentioned of the unexpected things that come up and the ways that it can connect to your future. So I spent hours and hours and hours talking to prosecutors and judges and all of these sorts of people, and I have resisted it for so long, but I think I learned that, you know, so the topic of war crimes prosecutions is very personal to me because I have family who went through the Armenian genocide. So this was always something I really cared about. And in talking to people who have directly worked on bringing justice to victims has kind of sparked within me, okay, I think I might go to law school. So it just, even the practical life kind of things that can come from just the people that you meet and the people you talk to, and how it's also surprising me how willing like some awesome people are to talk to students who are interested. Like I got to talk to international judges and prosecutors who have prosecuted some of the most like highly recognized cases of genocide and war crimes in the world. And it's just really cool what a thesis can allow you, who it can allow you to connect with, and how that can inspire you to do other things with your life.
I think from what you're saying, it disabuses this idea of imposter syndrome, and it shows that you're more than just a student, right? The fact that you can talk with incredible people and you don't need to worry about them taking you seriously. They do take you seriously, which is it's just always so incredible to hear from your stories about that. Hannah, Emily, Nate, any insights from your ends?
Yeah, I would just say very much similar things. And on a personal level, where I'm from, I think I learned so much more about the people around me. And I think particularly you hear things on the news about certain groups of people or violence and how it's characterized. And it taught me a lot about, you know, more about people and not to make assumptions about certain groups. So on that level, it was a great learning experience.
Yeah, I thought it taught me, I think this is what Francesco mentioned beforehand, but you know, with doing scholarly work, I feel like a lot of times we consume a lot of information, but we don't really produce kind of scholarly literature work. So it made me more comfortable with, you know, being able to defend my own ideas and come up with my own ideas and kind of what goes into that, looking at the justifications or assumptions behind them. And then another aspect that I really took with me and can bring with me for the future is how to work on assignments for a long period of time. I think I'd never worked on an assignment for a whole entire year. So it taught me a lot about, you know, how to pace my work and, you know, what to do with this idea and all this work and how to see it continue throughout a whole entire year.
Absolutely, absolutely. As we like to say, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And being able to go through that and be able to plan just gives you, you know, such valuable experience for other things that one might do with one's life. And, you know, recognizing personally, you know, I think something very important is building this empathy, right? Trying to understand other people who are quite different, other subjects, not making assumptions, you know, such a valuable experience. So when people say, well, what's the value of being a scholar? There are all these other kind of aspects that come through, right? That are so transferable, so applicable, even beyond that. And that goes, I think, speaks to the value of the type of education we're receiving, right? Nate?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo pretty much what most people have said in that it's a very validating experience. You know, it helps challenge imposter syndrome, and you know, it forces you to become comfortable with the idea that you can produce things. Very basically, you can produce things that are of worth, that are interesting, that contribute something to a discussion, to a field. And yeah, that's a super empowering experience. Just like Emily said, we spend a lot of our time consuming information, and a lot of the times we feel that, that we don't have that much power in that relationship. But we really do. You really can, write something that people will read. I mean, really simply.
Yeah, absolutely. I just saw a question from our audience, one that's for all of you. Could you maybe talk a little bit more about those challenges that you've experienced, especially with struggles with resources, changes in thesis topic, and what did you do to get through some of those challenges that you've mentioned and talked about in your own unique experiences? Taylor.
I think one thing that was challenging for me was, and this may not be the case for everyone, but because I was on the gap year, I wasn't necessarily taking the thesis class as I was doing a lot of this. So a lot of times I was like, how do I do research? Like, what does that mean? And luckily it was having a great advisor. But one of the best pieces of advice that my advisor gave me when I would come to a meeting being like, I feel like I need to read more about how to do interviews. I need to read more about how to look at data. He was like, just get started. He was like, just start doing something. And that advice, I think, was really good. He was like, go schedule those interviews and you'll figure it out along the way. Like, this is our undergrad thesis. And that's not to say that like an undergrad thesis isn't super, super important and really cool. But at the end of the day, so much about it is just learning and learning how to do research. And so, I talked to 2 PhD students who kind of were like, okay, stop freaking out. Like, this is just your undergrad thesis. Like, it's not your PhD. Like, these are the thoughts that you might have there. And so that's just to say, to just kind of comfort everybody a little bit. Even if you feel unprepared, just start doing things and you'll learn.
Anyone else want to add some insights on how they overcame some challenges?
Yeah, I'll add that. Yeah, everything that Taylor just said resonated a lot with me, taking the year off and feeling like I didn't have as much of a plan I could rely on. But again, having a great support network, finding a good advisor who's just going to be generous with their time is super key. And what else? Oh, I mean, I guess I didn't have library access this year, so that was kind of to be a little creative with my access to JSTOR.
How did you overcome that challenge?
Oh, mostly I was able to. I knew I was going to lose library access, so I was able to download a lot of things before, and then again relying on various kind people to use their access or send me resources has been very, very key. So again, that support network, and again, an advisor that will spend a lot of time with you.
Yeah, I see Taylor nodding in agreement, which sounds like a similar experience there. We have another question I've gotten actually that I think is also very, very relevant for everyone here. Chiara asks, for those of you that interviewed, was there anything that you found that was helpful in getting access to people that were fairly high up in the industry you were researching?
Yeah, I guess I could speak a little bit about this. I think I tried to reach out to just like a ton of different places. I found like community centers and just like searching the wide web. There's a lot on there that you can find, and there was always like someone that was able to connect me with another person. So that was super helpful. But also just at Harvard, like reaching out to certain professors and different departments, they tend to know a couple of great people. I mean, it's such a good network. So I think I was a little scared to do that at first, and I wish I'd done it earlier, because I found later just like so many different new people to interview, and I kind of stopped. So I'd say like the earlier the better, that you just email a ton of people, ask around, like don't be afraid to just cold call and go for it.
And keep track too, is what I would say. Make sure to keep a spreadsheet of who you've reached out to. And what I will say is that 100% of the time that I emailed someone with someone else's name saying I talked to X person, they got back with me. I mean, I did use I used some of my thesis funding to get LinkedIn Premium so that I could send messages to like high up people, and that worked. Like, get creative. Like, sometimes that's what you got to do. But like, for sure, having that person, once you get in the gate, just keep going and follow up on every lead that people give you.
So keeping track and having good warm introductions when you can, right? And leveraging your networks, definitely very important. Anyone else want to jump in? Yes, Elizabeth.
So I can also talk about the problems with interviewing online. I didn't necessarily have like a field I was focusing on, since my only requirement was that they be Scottish. But I do think like recruitment online was particularly tough because I had to rely on the kindness of the people that I knew who went to university in Scotland to reach out to their friends, which kind of creates a bias in and of itself. And then I hoped that those people would give me names and go from there. So I interviewed less people than I had originally thought I would, which was fine. But like Taylor said, I had a spreadsheet of like all the names of the people, how I found out about them, their emails, and then the first date I emailed them, then the follow-ups, and then the third follow-up if necessary, and so on and so forth. And so I think kind of this also answers like the challenges aspect question, but recruitment in Zoom era is difficult, but not doable. Just like needing to be creative and like making sure you're like dogged about getting people to respond to you and setting up interviews.
So incredible advice, incredible suggestions. Sally, maybe I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, absolutely. So we're closing up for the day. It is 4:59 p.m. We are deeply grateful for another wonderful year of the thesis writing workshop coming to a close. Thank you so much again to Laura and Vasilis for incredible support for this group of folks over the course of 2 years in the case of this group of students, and over the year in the case of our current juniors. And thank you to all our presenters for giving us we are privileged to have an inside look at your thesis process and to hear all about how you made it work during some really tough times. So thank you again. Have a great weekend, and congratulations, 21.
Congrats, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you so much.
Guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.